Marvin, the world treating you well?
We're going to get started. Good evening. Today is Monday, October 11, 2021. Welcome to this evening's regular meeting of the Oregon City Council. Let's begin tonight's meeting by standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council for attendance this evening?
Mr. Davish?
Here.
Mr. Horniak?
Here.
Mrs. Powell? Here. Mr. Reeves?
Here.
Mr. Seaman?
Here.
Mr. Wallensack?
Here.
Mr. Zale?
Here. Thank you. Please note that all members of council are present. Also joining us are Clerk of Council, Ms. Tina Evans, Mayor Michael Safarian, our Law Director, Melissa Pora, Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman, Finance Director, Ms. Darlene Huntermark, Police Chief Brandon Began, Assistant Police Chief Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Mr. Dennis Hartman, and Assistant Fire Chief Mr. Mark Mullins. Council, our first order of business would be the approval of the meeting minutes from the September 13th, 2021 regular meeting of council. Can I get a motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Can I get a second? Second. Second by Mr. Horniak. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, the meeting minutes from the September 13th, 2021 regular meeting of council are passed as presented. Council, I do want to remind you that with the new microphone system, we do need to speak directly into the microphones. We've had some other people reach out to us again that we have not been speaking into the microphones, therefore they cannot hear us. So please, when you speak into the microphones. Council, we did not have a committee the whole meeting last week. Therefore, we need to add items 113 through 119 of 2021 to this evening's agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
Mr. President, I
Yes,
move to
Mr.
add
Seaman.
items 113 through 119 to this evening's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Second. Second by Mr. Reeves. Council, is there any objections? Hearing no objections, items 113 through 119 are added to this evening's agenda. We will start with item number 113 of 2021. This item is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and Finance Director, Ms. Darlene Huntermark. Mayor?
We can go to Darlene, and then we have a representative from the company here.
Perfect.
So
Darlene?
Thank you, Mr. President. The city distributed RFPs in September, and it was determined that Highland submitted the best and lowest proposal. The premium for the upcoming year will show a decrease of $16,000. And Lori Manning from Highland is here, and she would be happy to try to answer any questions that council might have.
Thank you. And Lori, would you please state your name and address for the record, please? Thank you.
Any questions? Anything that anybody wants to ask about the renewal?
Please stand under the mill, just like it has been in the past.
I mean, we enhanced a few things, nothing really substantial, but I mean, we always look at the coverages and make sure that we feel comfortable with all the limits. But we did enhance a few things, some theft limits, and some tweak the cyber a little bit, and we actually decreased the premium. So, and it's really a result of your long-term membership. I mean, you've been with us almost 20 years, since 2004. And when you go out to bid and you have a new company coming in trying to buy business, we do whatever it takes to keep you. So the underwriting department gave you a large credit for your long-term membership. So.
Thank you. Council, is there any questions?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Seaman.
you know, we keep close track of all our inventory when we get something new or when we get rid of something, you know. Now, is some of that 16,000 because we diminished our inventory? What would you say to that? Okay. Well, I didn't know.
No, your exposures were very similar to last year. There were not a lot of changes. It's really because there is a new company coming into the municipality market, and they literally copied our form, and they are going out to try to quote municipalities, and they are undercutting what the risk really costs. And we just really gave you a long-term loyalty credit.
Well, Mr. President.
Mr. Seaman.
Yeah, I think the Ohio plan is a great value, and it gives us the city strong and secure protection for all of our rolling stock and also for our specialized equipment and facilities.
Thank you. Yeah, we really do honor even when you forget, let's say we don't find out about something for 30 days, it is still covered. So we have a lot of nuances that really help a city with a lot of moving parts. So, thank you, very beneficial.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Councilors, any further questions? Hearing no further questions, I will sign item number 113 of 2021 with ordinance number 113 of 2021 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans?
Authorizing the renewal of the Ohio Plan Insurance Pool coverage as administered by Highland Administrative Services LLC, 811 Madison Avenue, Toledo, Ohio, for property and liability insurance coverage, general liability, employer's liability, employee benefits liability, law enforcement officers liability, public officials liability, automobile property, special property, electronic equipment, media, crime, boiler and machinery, and excess liability insurance, and an initial premium amount of $212,806, and premium adjustments for additions and deletions and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council?
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
I
Seaman?
move for passage of ordinance number 113 of 2021 as an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Ms. Evans, would you please take roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 113 of 2021 as an emergency measure?
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzek?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 113 of 2021 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. Move to item number 114. Item 114 again is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and Finance Director, Ms. Darlene Huntermark. Ms. Huntermark, we're going to go directly to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. This agreement, it's a 3-year agreement, and there are no increases in fees from the previous 3 years. And we've been having a lot of, we've always been very happy with Schoenhart, and we've worked with them since 1993.
Thank you. Councilors, any questions for the administration on item number 114?
Mr. President,
Mr. Seaman?
so for 3 years then in a row, then they will not increase the rate for this project.
Right, it's $16,800 per year.
Mhm. And how would you in layman's term say what they do in terms of how they organize our annual GAAP financial report? How do you describe that? I mean, what does that mean? Why is it something that we can't do? And I'm not saying we should do it, but I'm just saying,
Sure.
how's it specialized that we need to use them?
Mr. Beasley?
Mr. President and Mr. Seaman, in organizations our size, it is considered best practice to bring a separate set of eyes, kind of function like an outside auditor, to help look at the way we manage our accounts, maintain our reports, and produce it so it's GAAP financing. So for an organization and finance departments our size, that is best practice. And it's good for us to have another set of eyes, an independent accountant look at us and, hey, how about this? They challenge us sometimes to do things a different way. The same way the state auditors teams do as we go through it. And we think that's good for us. I think it's a good, healthy give and take.
Yeah, I can see that because some of the accounts are quite complex and varied. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Council, any further questions on item 114? Hearing no further questions, I'll sign item 114 with ordinance number 114 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans?
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter into an agreement with Donald J. Schoenhart and Associates Incorporated, 5307 Franklin Street, Hilliard, Ohio, for consulting services to provide assistance in the preparation of the annual GAAP financial report in the amount of $16,800 per year plus travel reimbursement for fiscal year 2021, 2022, and 2023 reports.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council?
Mr. President,
Mr. Seaman?
yes, I'd like to move for passage of item 114 of 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Second by Mr. Davish. Ms. Evans, would you please take roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 114 of 2021?
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzek?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 114 of 2021 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. We'll speak about 115 and 16. We'll present them both at the same time, then vote on them separately. But I do want everybody to know that these will not be presented as emergency measures. On the heading, it shows that they're emergency measures, but they will not be going forward as emergency measures. So therefore, item number 115 and 116 is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and Finance Director Ms. Darlene Huntermark. And we're going to go to the mayor first. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. And council, when we put in subdivisions, we have a requirement that they be lit. So this is something we require, and the developer from each of these units, which is Eagles Landing and Eden Park, both of the developers did apply for these poles to be installed. So they become 100% of the petition as the developer. And we don't have the choice to do this, with the obligation to allow them to do this because it's something we require. If there is any questions, it's very routine. We do it with every subdivision. So this is what it is.
Mr. Beasley?
I just want to add in a question that Councilman Zale asked. These LED lights are more dark sky friendly than the other versions we had historically. There are, I think the next generation will be even better, and we're having some conversations about the next generation of these things as we go forward.
Okay, Mr. President,
Mr. Zale?
just as a question, Mr. Beasley, when we're requiring these new subdivisions to put in these lights.
Correct.
And I take it there's very minor restrictions within our zoning or building and zoning that they would have to go with. You know what I would like to see in the future for new subdivisions. Would we have to change our building and zoning to restrict builders to go with what we would like to see the city have?
Mr. Beasley?
And that's just my thing, but
We think a little adjustment to our code on the petition process and then accepted criteria would achieve that objective. It's not necessarily building and zoning, but it's we have a path. We're actually looking at some different options that could be available going forward.
well, the reason I bring that up is we wouldn't have to, each time this comes up, we
That's
wouldn't
That's
address it because
That's correct.
this is what we'd like to see. They would have to actually do that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zale. Is there any further questions on items 115 or 116? Hear no questions, I will sign item number 115 of 2021 with ordinance number 115 of 2021 and ask Mrs. Evans to read it into the record. Mrs. Evans?
Authorizing the Toledo Edison Company to install one 50-watt LED acorn post-top style luminaries on fiberglass poles with underground supply located in Eagles Landing Plat 11, providing for the assessment to benefited property owners.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council?
Mr. President,
Mr. Davish?
I move for passage of ordinance number 115 of 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Davish.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Polliff. Ms. Evans, would you please take roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 115 of 2021?
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mrs. Polliff?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 115 of 2021 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. Item number 116, I'm guessing there's no questions. I will sign item number 116 with ordinance number 116 of 2021. And ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Mrs. Evans?
Authorizing the Toledo Edison Company to install 7 50-watt LED acorn post-top style luminaries on fiberglass poles with underground supply located in Eden Park Villas, providing for the assessment to benefited property owners.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. Council?
Mr. President,
Mr. Davish?
I move for passage of ordinance number 116 of 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Davish. Second by Mrs. Polliff. Mrs. Evans, would you please take roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 116 of 2021?
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mrs. Polliff?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance number 116 of 2021 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. Move to item number 117 of 2021. Item number 117 is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and Public Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman. We're going to go directly to Mr. Roman. Mr. Roman?
Thank you, Mr. President. And this contract is for a waterline valve replacement work on Navarre Avenue at the intersections of Wynn and then also at Stadium. It's really work that's just a little bit beyond what our water distribution crews are used to. We are looking at purchasing equipment eventually to do some of this work on our own, but until then, we felt it would be prudent to hire this out. So out of 3 bids received, Hillebrand and Sons was the lowest and best bid. And this work was included in our CIP budget. So they're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Councilors, any questions for the administration on item number 117 of 2021?
Mr. President,
Mr. Seaman?
now what kind of, how do you describe the water valve improvement exactly?
Well, this, Mr. President, Mr. Seaman, this is actually a replacement of a water line valve, perhaps a valve that's not seating properly, not shutting off all the way. And to some degree, it just needs to be replaced. Sometimes you have to install a live valve, meaning you're installing under live pressure. And that is the equipment we're looking at purchasing on our own to be able to do on our own someday. But until then, you hire a company to do that. So some of that work is in this scope to install a valve under live pressure. And then, but all of the basic line item of this work is replacing valves, water line valves. And you need valves to shut water lines down when there's a break or you need to make a tap or do other work. So that's the function of a valve.
And then now like the live pressure, then that means you don't have to shut the water down.
correct.
You can keep it
That's correct.
up. Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
and we had money in our budget to buy equipment to do that. We have not done that yet. And eventually we will, but there's other work that takes precedent that we need to do sooner. And that's why we're hiring this work out.
Yeah, that's a good system to keep the live pressure, therefore nobody gets cut off of the water. Thank you.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Reeves?
Mr. Roman, what's the timeframe of this? From start to finish, approximately?
This size of work would, Mr. President, Mr. Reeves, this size of work would only take about a month at a time to do this
Okay.
degree. So
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Councilor, any further questions for the administration on item number 117? Hearing no further questions, I'll sign item number 117 of 2021 with ordinance number 117 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans?
Accepting the bid of Hillebrand and Sons Construction LLC, 5811 Woodville Road, North One, Ohio, for furnishing labor, materials, and equipment for the Navarre Avenue water valve improvements, authorizing the Mayor, Director of Public Service, and Finance Director to enter into a contract with said contractor and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Pauloff?
I move for passage of ordinance number 117 of 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Reeves. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 117 of 2021 as an emergency measure.
Mrs. Pauloff?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 117 of 2021 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. Move to item number 118 of 2021. Item number 118 is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Sperian, Recreation Director, Mr. Tim Borton, Public Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor, we had achieved a contract with broadband for his internet service for the concession stand. And we're granting the easement so that we can get that service to the concession stand.
Thank you. Will this provide Wi-Fi service for people that are at the ballpark?
Mr. President, not generally. This is, the purpose of this primarily is so that we can run a cash register and credit card transfer. That's our goal there.
Yeah, but there will no, we're not putting out a hotspot.
We're not doing that for now. Obviously, people can come and stand around here and get on our public system here, but most of them will be using whatever their plan is out there.
Understand. Thank you. Councilors, any further questions for the administration on item number 118 of 2021?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Horniak.
question for you. I was trying to follow along through the diagram and asked Ms. Evans to put that up there. Where are we tapping into this line or where is this line coming from?
Mr. Roman?
I know that they need an easement to establish the exact route, but I do know it comes off the parking lot around just actually out back here and goes straight south. So, but they still have to write a description for this easement. I know it'll be about 10 foot wide. Other things can go through the easement, but they require an easement for them to install this on a big campus like this.
Does it require any disruption to the existing pavement fields, anything like
No,
that?
no,
None of that
no,
whatsoever?
no.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
Mr. Roman, that will be underground, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you,
See
Mr.
right
Reeves.
across second base.
I can't hear you.
There may be some aerial to a degree that comes through the park. I
Mhm.
think there's some, but I think it's intended to be underground.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Council, any further questions for the administration on item number 118 of 2021? Hearing no further questions, I'll sign item number 118 with ordinance number 118 of 2021. And ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Mrs. Evans.
Authorizing the mayor to execute an easement with Buckeye Cablevision Incorporated, DBA Buckeye Broadband, 2700 Oregon Road, Northwood, Ohio, for the purpose of installing and maintaining a fiber optics telecommunication transmission line on the Coons Recreation Complex at 5330 Seaman Road, Oregon, Ohio.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
I move for passage of ordinance 118 of 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 118 of 2021?
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mrs. Pollock?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance number 118 of 2021 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. Move to that last item for consideration and passage this evening, item number 119. Item number 119 is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian, Recreation Director, Mr. Tim Borton, and Public Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll start, and I think Mr. Beasley and Mr. Roman may have some comments. I think you're aware of the fact that we have our boat launch down at the present time. It's in dire need of repair. It's exceeded its life expectancy on the decking and some of the other services of it. We originally put cones up, but people moved them, and we're still finding to damage their vehicles trying to go down our ramp. So we put them concrete structures to block it. So we did get quotes from different people and found this was probably one of the more professional companies to do this work. It does also include some dredging, some cleaning out of tree limbs and trees that came in there. So there's more than just do the repair. It's fairly intense repair, but we found out that we did actually exceed the time limit that those docks usually tend to give. So Mr. Beasley, I think he has a comment. So does
Mr. Beasley?
Just a note, Mr. President, obviously, the state and the city entered this agreement quite a number of years ago. It does expire in a few years, and each of us at our option can just simply renew it. We do have a lot of call for boat launch access. Obviously, this has never worked for very large boats, but unless the wind has blown the water away, you can put a lot of boats can fit in there. I know I have relatives that use it. That it is, in this case, the frame is still in good condition, but they will pull that out. They'll sandblast it, repaint it. Then it needs redecking. The dock itself needs to be redone as well. But as the mayor said, it's really the stuff that's in the water. Some of the boulders need some moving around, and this is a good team. We wish we had more bidders, but we actually felt like this was a good and reasonable price for something that is, we're Oregon on the bay. This is our access point, and we need to get it updated. Just as ours was starting to deteriorate, and we're noticing it, ODNR was giving us a heads up, as the mayor said, that the other ones they had built at the same time as ours were starting to go. So it was time. All right. So
thank you, Mr. Beasley. Mr. Roman?
No, other than if you read the lease, we are required, obviously, we want it to be safe, but we're required to make sure everything is safe and up to speed. So that's why it's here as an emergency as well.
Can you give me a time frame on when it's going to start, how long it's going to take? Because I know I've been contacted by somebody saying, it's getting time where I'm going to fish and I want to get out there.
Yeah, I think it's intended to be done here in the next month. and
Mr.
I
President,
hope that's gonna be the case.
Pretty quick. He's going to get it done within a couple of weeks here, is our
Okay.
expectation. So,
Thank you.
thanks. He's going. They're ready to move.
Council, is there any questions for the administration on item number 119 of 2021?
Yeah.
Hear no questions, I'll sign item number 119 with ordinance number 119 of 2021 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
Accepting the quote from Molnar Construction, 3327 W.Dar Hoppinger Road, Port Clinton, Ohio, for furnishing labor materials and equipment for the 2021 refurbishment of the boat ramp and dock located at 4926 Bay Shore Road, authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter into a contract with said contractor and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
I move for passage of ordinance 119 of 2021 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council for passage of ordinance number 119 of 2021 as an emergency measure?
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mrs. Polloff?
yes,
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzek?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 119 of 2021 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. That concludes the items for consideration and passage this evening. Council, we do have a liquor permit before us. The liquor permit, a new liquor permit for BJ's Hideaway Steakhouse LLC, doing business as BJ's Hideaway Steakhouse, located at 506 South Lollendorf Road, Oregon, Ohio, 43616. Council, what's your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Mayor?
I just make a couple comments on this because people, I'm sure council people will recall, they just passed one for BJ's. And a question came up that it was a 230 liquor license and informed them that that the conditions that were placed on it, the planning commission then solidified by council would be the binding rules that BJ's would operate under. The new liquor permit is a 1 o'clock liquor license. No sales for takeout are permitted with this. So it's a less priced one on services he wasn't going to need anyways. And there'll be one permit, which would be this one versus the other one. So he can do everything he is permitted to do with this lesser expensive one.
A more restrictive one, essentially.
It is, he's got more restrictions, and yet we have more restrictions on it than it even permits. So is I think just a economic, when you say that, Tina, an economic decision and probably a smart one.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, what's your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Mr. Zale?
just a question on that. Did that mean did he sell the original liquor license?
It's not like that. You're applying for it and just paying for the permit. So he'll have this one instead of.
So the other one is void then?
Yes. The other one is void now.
They do business a little differently in liquor licenses than you're used to when people have those and house them and sell them. That doesn't happen that often anymore. They can apply for existing ones and just pay the fee for that permit.
Okay, so like I said, the one that we
the other one
approved
will
a while
be
ago,
gone. The other one
that's
won't exist.
gone. That's off the table.
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Zale.
based on the information that I've received and any investigations on this, I would request the clerk to not to request a hearing on this permit.
Thank you, Mr. Zale. Second by Ms. Polloff. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, we will request that the clerk check that we do not seek a hearing on this liquor permit.
Mr. President,
Mr. Seaman?
yeah, like as the mayor indicated, the planning commission put some restrictions on this in terms of how late he will stay open. And then, of course, who watches for that he adheres to the restrictions placed on it.
Mr. Beasley?
Mr. President, what we usually traditionally do, just like anything else, if we see complaints, they would go investigate it and I'm guessing the police department would go over there and, say or no, we said the inspection department.
Yeah.
Would go there and, say in violation, but usually it's not on people complaining. That's the way it would traditionally done, because otherwise we wouldn't know. We weren't gonna send an inspector there every day.
And the conditions that the planning commission put out have teeth in them, right?
Of course.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Then
And remember, planning commission sets them, council adopts them.
Mhm.
So that's something that actually you actually passed. So that when it actually gets the teeth is when council passes it.
Right, and the city enforces it well. There's a good I don't know, there's a probability he might sell that establishment and that license. So the other person has to understand that when they purchase it.
Of course, that's their obligation to understand the rules and regulations that they have, and the zoning goes with the property. So as long as they keep active when that 2-year window, they have the same rights as the property does.
Yeah, I just get concerned somebody has a different idea of what kind of bar they want to put in there and they're eager.
They're
to
all
buy it and it's
restricted
eager sell it.
They're all restricted to the conditions that go with the property.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Council, any further questions? All right, we do have a liquor permit transfer before us today also. The liquor permit is currently listed as S&G Stores LLC, doing business as S&G 58 at 1855 Woodville Road, Oregon, Ohio 43616. It will be transferred to A&M Business Inc., located at 1855 Woodville Road, Oregon, Ohio 43616. Council, what is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Mr. Zale?
based on the information that we have, I would advise our clerk to check the box that we do not request a hearing on this liquor permit.
Thank you, Mr. Zale. Second by Mrs. Powell. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, therefore we will request that the clerk check the box that we do not seek a hearing on the liquor permit transfer. That concludes the items for consideration and passes this evening, and we will move to the mayor's report. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and council have distributed some promotions, some retirements, some resignations, and I'm going to start with this first one, and that is for Robert Zunk, which is employee 2549, and Robert Zunk is currently a firefighter 1, and I am asked council's concurrence in the promotion to firefighter 2 with an effective date of tomorrow, October 12th. And Robert will be firefighter 2 at $24.31 an hour, or an annual rate of $63,216.92. And I would ask council's concurrence once again of promoting Robert Zunk from firefighter 1 to firefighter 2, effective October 12th, 2021.
Thank you, Mayor. Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Zale.
I move to concur with the mayor on the promotion of Robert Zunk to firefighter 2.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
Second.
Second by Ms. Powell. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, Mayor, council concurs with the promotion of Mr. Robert Zunk to firefighter 2.
Thank you, council. Next, and this is from the Division of Public Service in the Engineering Department, one of our interns, Mr. Roman's department, Josh Davids, is preparing to move to the next venture in his career. So being as that is the case, I would ask council's concurrence in accepting his resignation as engineering intern as of October 8th, 2021. And once again, I ask council's concurrence.
Thank you, Mayor. Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Davish.
I'd like to concur with the mayor of the resignation of Josh Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Davish.
Second.
Second by Ms. Powell. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, Mayor, council concurs with the acceptance of the resignation of Josh Davids.
And then I'd ask council's concurrence in accepting the resignation of Paul Jones, effective the 12th of October, 2021. Once again, I'd ask the council's concurrence in accepting his wishes to move up.
Thank you, Mayor Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Zale.
I move to concur with the mayor on accepting the resignation of Paul Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, Mayor Council concurs with the acceptance of the resignation of Mr. Paul Jones.
And lastly, I'd ask council's concurrence in accepting the retirement of firefighter Steve Sprague, effective today, October 11th. And I'd ask council's concurrence in the acceptance of the retirement of Steve Sprague.
Thank you, Mayor Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Zale.
I move to concur with the mayor on accepting the retirement of Steve Sprague.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, Mayor Council concurs with the acceptance of the retirement of Mr. Steve Sprague.
Thank you, council. And with that, I would conclude my report.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Beasley.
Mr. President, no report today.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Ms. Purpura.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Roman.
I have no report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Reeves.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Zale.
Thank you, Mr. President. As some members know here, we did have a safety committee meeting tonight regarding the use of golf carts on city streets. And I think we all came to agreement on the equipment and licensing requirements that the legislation will contain, and as well as where golf carts will be permitted, which is because it appears that they're going to be licensed anyway, so we probably won't restrict the movement of them much anyway. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Zale. Mr. Seaman.
Yes, our last farmer's market of the year was a raging success. It was overcast, but people came out to get the last bit of fun, I guess. We had great attendance, and I'd like to thank, Tina Evans and Summer Breeslar and Jennifer from the Chamber of Commerce. They did a great job coordinating all the vendors and setting it up for everybody to have a great time. So good work, everyone. We hope that we do next year and maybe have a few different twists to it to make it even a little bit more interesting. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Mr. Dabish.
No report, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Dabish. Ms. Pauloff.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff. Mr. Horniak.
Just one item I'd like to share with the members. The Oregon Economic Development Foundation does have their monthly meeting this Friday at Maycomber Lodge. So for anybody that can attend or would like to be a part of that, certainly welcome to do so. Typically starts about 8 a.m. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. I have no report from my standing committee. We will move into the public participation, persons and delegation section. At this point in time, I would ask everybody to be respectful, ask questions. It's not a platform to take personal shots at each other. If you have a personal vendetta against somebody, deal with that personally. This is not the forum to do that. So therefore, I will have the first person that signed in, Mr. Steve Salander. Steve, state your name and address for the record, please. Thank you, Steve.
It's underneath.
You just got to move the podium.
Okay, there we go. All right. I'll send you an invoice. So, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody. First of all, I do want to acknowledge the guidelines that you have stated and that you have restated here today. Thank you for that. And I will abide by those, and I expect, and I ask you to please hold me accountable if I were to fail on that. So,
Thank you.
thank you. I just have two questions really today. And whoever has the answer, feel free to answer. Doesn't matter in that. But first question has to do with, I know we are roughly about 3 weeks away now from consolidation, where Oregon calls and such will be heading down to the COG downtown. So my question, I know we had talked a little bit about it, but it wasn't completely determined yet as far as non-emergency calls. I was just curious on how those were going to be handled and where those would be answered at.
Thank you, Steve.
Yes.
Mr. Beasley?
Mr. President, our 911 calls will be answered by the COG. They will also answer, depending on the circumstances, non-emergency calls that get there. They get a good number of calls that come into that system. There's always a blurred line between people who call, whether it's an emergency for those things or not. We will have, the same way the city has now, a phone tree that will work through our system. Right now, if you call, if you go online and look up our phone number, it says 698-7000. It runs through a phone tree. It'll run through that same phone tree. It'll go out to our superintendents as needed and dealt with those situations in those same ways. In some circumstances, it'll end up at, if, you know, there's some things that someone might think is an emergency, it'll end up down at the dispatch, and they will, just as our dispatch now, they will then send that maybe to Mary Wolf or maybe to Keith, depending on the event and the circumstances. We are still working through gaming out the exact flow over the next couple of weeks, but that's generally the process.
Okay, thank you. So they will, so if citizens need to call, they'll call the same
Same
number
way,
as
yeah.
before.
Citizens won't
As far as
notice
on
a
that end of it.
difference on it.
Okay, all right, so I know it will go, like you're saying, it would filter through to the different places, and if it is deemed as potentially emergency, then it would go on to 911. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, like any other of those things, the first thing that you get on any recordings is, if this is emergency, please hang up and dial 911. Some people have a different line for where an emergency is.
Right.
Unfortunately, they err on both sides. We have some things that are emergencies that they're not treating as if.
Right.
Our goal is just like we do now, to try and get it to the right place.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Second question, I don't remember exactly when it was. I want to say maybe it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. There was a meeting at the school where they were talking about the different cameras that we have at the schools. And they were saying at that time that our dispatch monitors those cameras in the schools. And so with the change in how dispatch is going to be handled, I was curious who is going to be monitoring the school cameras?
Thank you. Mr. Beasley, Chief Began, I'm not sure if you can answer that question for us.
Yeah, so we're in the process of upgrading all of our cameras out here. We use DW Spectrum. It is the same system that is through the schools. We do have access to that. As far as it's internet-based, you can get the app, you can pull it up, and you can see all the camera views as well.
So the department themselves will just be monitoring those? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah,
or
so
understanding?
our supervisors will have access to that, assistant chief, myself, probably the road lieutenant as well. And we'll give access to our SRO commander, the sergeant who's in charge of that. We're not going to be sitting there on our phone monitoring the cameras all the time.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in dispatch now,
Right.
but we will have the ability, if there is an incident, to be able to pull that up either on our phone or on a desktop or laptop.
So the officers in their cars, and they were saying before about how they can bring it up at the cameras and be able to see in the school from in the cars. Is that still?
Yes, that
still
is
true. Okay.
That is available.
Okay. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Next person on the list is Mrs. Beth Ackerman. Ms. Ackerman, would you please state your name and address for the record, please?
Beth Ackerman, 931 Berry Road. You guys are really helping
Thank you.
me overcome my fear of public speaking. Kind of, not quite, but getting there. 931 Berry Road. Anyway, you guys know that. I wanted to just ask you if whoever, probably you, I'm guessing, and on the ramp, I mean, I fish a lot and kayak and stuff, and so there's a lot of discussion about the ramp and whether or not it could have been just like bolstered up to get through this waterfowl fishing season, and but it just asking.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I think Mr. Borden Mr. Borden is in charge of the project, and I do know they've made a lot of repairs through the years. I know it's 20-some years old, and I think it's mainly the grading is the problem. It's literally a liability. Question is, what can they? I mean, if they can make a repair, then does it fail within the next week? I mean, that's
Right.
the fear. So
I mean, I've used it, so that's why I'm one of them that's going.
I mean,
There's a
could be
whole
lucky,
like you
yeah,
could put
right.
a sheet on that.
Right. I mean, this work is some dredging. It involves, replacing the itself. And yeah, I get it. There may never be a good time of year to do it.
Well, would there be a possibility of you roping it off in a way that, say, like, I have a kayak, I don't need the ramp, I
Oh.
could go in next to it, or a guy with a duck boat, or, do we have to have it closed? Because what if we have bad weather? That's what the duck hunters are living for. and Could they consider that?
Well, I do know this, if the ramp itself is on a hinge, it's literally something that swings up and out. I think they have to take it totally off to do it. So otherwise it's gonna be a drop.
Well, if they took it away from there, those of us, well, yeah, but I
I
don't,
get it. And there could probably be all kinds of ways of getting a canoe and something else. You know what I mean?
I'm just saying to shut it off
me try one
completely during like the perch are moving into the western
I
basin.
think they're gonna pull that
Duck
hinge
hunters
out.
are,
Yeah.
okay.
Mr. President, just a note, we really hoped because of the timing,
Mhm.
I have one son speaking up to me about it as well, who's a duck hunter and has a light boat that he goes out in. It was really a safety concern and we thought it would make it through the year. It
Well,
didn't.
that's what I mean, though. You
Yeah.
don't really need the ramp. to
Correct.
launch. So to close the entire access,
But what we ended up with people,
broke that off.
that's what we started with was just some cones, knowing, oh, people move the cones and put their kayaks in. It didn't work.
I mean, I don't even need the ramp. to,
I know.
like, put my kayak there,
We
but
know.
the next access would be Mommy Bay State Park.
Well, I'll
which
tell
is
you
a
what we'll
long haul
do.
across
We will
the
check and see
sand,
if there's a path. Our concern is safety. We
Yeah,
have to
right,
make
right.
sure we're
But
focused
I
on
mean,
safety. We'll check.
I'm sure you guys could coordinate off in a way that the duck hunters could still get in there. I mean, you guys
It's
know
worth
what
checking.
kind of
It's worth
boats
checking.
they
They
use.
claim they're gonna be really
The
fast
layout
at
boats
repairing
are.
this. They
Pardon?
claim that they're gonna be very fast at repairing.
And
it.
there's
Okay.
materials they have to order and so on. I think the one thing that you want to be careful about, as much as you think, just barrel it off and use a certain section, you might be okay. Problem we had last time is somebody moved the barrels,
Oh, yeah.
put their thing in, didn't put them back, and then you had. an
Other
accident.
people blew the tires in their trailer.
But I mean, I put my kayak in, I don't even use the ramp.
We know.
I don't know.
Okay,
That's
but
the
I'm
problem.
just saying, like,
I get it.
it's gonna cut a lot of people
I'm
off
just
at
saying,
a,
we had an incident
really-
where somebody removed the barrels.
okay, well, if there's a chance, you guys,
We
'cause
agree.
Otherwise, Cullen Park's a long haul around.
We agree. That's why
All right,
we're
so-
moving ahead.
I know, that's my biggest worry right now. But anyway, a lot of people were asking about it. I want to ask the mayor, you just said, if the planning commission approves it, council adopts it. Is that
Always
true
the
of
case.
does there usually dissent on things like, or if the planning commission goes ahead with it, is that, I'm learning, give me, forbearance here, but does council always generally approve anything, or is there, because they
Not
can.
always.
Yeah.
No. Is any SUEs, any zoning changes, they come here.
Mhm.
If there's a thing called a conditional use, it's a binding decision by the planning commission.
Okay.
So, conditional use, binding by the planning commission does not come.
Okay.
Other than that, the SUEs or zoning changes are recommendations from,
And then you guys, but the council votes.
Correct.
then.
I mean,
Okay.
just the council votes
But they
on it.
they don't just follow just because the planning
No.
commission
No,
says it,
no,
they actually dissent.
If something,
Correct.
if something passes
Okay,
by the planning commission, a simple majority would pass it
okay,
by council. If council wants to alter that decision, they would need 6 votes to alter it. And if they altered it, then they would need 4 votes to pass it then. If they did it in 2 steps, they did it 1 step, they would need 6 steps to pass it. Then if the planning commission voted something down, it would take 6 votes of council to
to
overturn it.
overturn. Okay, thanks.
Simple majority to vote it down otherwise.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say to you that even though I have vehemently disagreed with some of the things that you do believe in, and that we've had our disagreements, I think that you've always been civil. And I think that I've never felt like I didn't have a voice when you're conducting meetings. And I think the public appreciates you, regardless of where we may not see eye to eye. But
Certainly.
I do appreciate your demeanor and the way that you handle these meetings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Ackerman. The last person signed up this evening is Mr. PJ Caphammer. PJ, state your name and address for the record, please.
PJ Caphammer, 3646 Navarre Avenue. I called Tim last week about this, but I just found out about it, but there's been a rash of vandalism where they're stealing catalytic converters in Oregon and they're hitting all the businesses. I believe it's over a couple $100,000 they've caused in theft to a lot of the vehicles around Oregon. And when I called Tim, I hunt at night and I run thermals. And it's kind of, most people don't understand how thermals work, but they're heat driven. It's like turning the lights on. So like literally, if you're a mile away, I can literally look at you when you're coming out of your front porch with the stuff that I have and see you walk around your yard and everything you're doing at your yard a mile away. And I told Tim, I said, this would change how we police at night. I know we're rural and it's really dark out in most of our rural areas. But if we would buy a set of binocular thermals, they're like, mine are like 12 grand, but you can get a really good set for about $6,000. If we had an officer who drove around and utilized this technology in the dark, I mean, it's amazing technology. I mean, I'm not kidding you. Like I can see you go out and smoke a cigarette on your front porch from a mile away. And anything out there, like an open lot, and I was telling Tim this, if you go over the viaduct, and one of the big ones that got hit was the buses, Tesco. I think they got them for like $80,000, $90,000.
A little more than that.
They got them a couple times, over 100,000. But if you're over that viaduct and you had your thermal on, you could see everything in that lot, every person, anything moving, the person fully, you would see it like light and day. Like I told him, the car they drove when they park it is heated. So you see a car that's at 3 a.m., there shouldn't be any car that has a heat signature to it.
Mr. Caphammer, I'm going to ask Mr. Beegan right now. Mr. Beegan, is that something you'd like to have for your department?
We do have night vision.
Thermal or night vision?
We have one thermal that's in one of our vehicles. One of the problems with the thermal and the night vision, you can't drive around and use it. So we do have officers who take them and they will stop and check areas. It is, I mean, it's not easy to catch somebody in the act because they hit all over the place. It's not just the same thing. They come in, they get out fairly quickly. In most circumstances, of course, we've had some bigger ones where it's been more than just one vehicle at a time. We do have officers out keeping an eye on that. We have utilized special details where we have certain officers and detectives who go out in the area where these are happening. But it comes in spurts as well. So we do utilize that technology. We also have a drone that has a thermal imager. The drone
Yeah, I
is
knew about
down now. We don't typically use that for normal, to keep an eye out for people cutting off catalytic converters. But we are aware we have changed our operations. Our officers want nothing more than to catch these people in the act, and we have been successful in that in the past as well.
Yeah, because I did talk to a couple of officers, they'd have to buy their own, but I mean, like $6,000 is like a game changer for nighttime. And if you just had somebody, and you're right, you get a little whitewash when you look through it for a period of time and it kind of goes away. I have a monocular that you can see the other one, but you're correct on that. But even if somebody was in a car, like once in a while, they get grants and
Sure. Mr. President?
it would change
Mr.
the
Beasley.
whole way they police.
Just as you know, we and our department, as well as almost every department
They're
in
getting
Southeast
crushed.
Michigan and Northwest Ohio
it's
is getting
unbelievable.
nailed. And what is happening is they're rotating through. So somebody's doing Northwood and then they're doing Rossford and they're doing Perrysburg, other communities, and it's hitting in pretty good numbers. Our team has worked well with kind of a regional effort to deal with it broader than just here. We will explore what any tools that we can use to make it more likely to help be part of the team that catches them in the act, because it's expensive to deal with for any property owner or vehicle owner that's had to go through it.
It's like $2 grand a pop. on
And
vehicles.
it's actually a national issue around here we're dealing with.
I know it's not, and I know it's because we don't prosecute. There's not much you can do with it. I mean, we do, but there's not a lot you can do with it. And then I know they try to curb this. It should technically not be allowed to be done because you can't even buy a catalytic converter without the title. So they're, and it's not one group doing it because they're getting 40, 50 bucks a pop. They take a Sawzall. They literally cut your car apart in like 20 seconds and they're out. It's amazing how fast they do it. But I get it. But I'm gonna drive around with mine and start looking around because it's not hard to pick up on. You'd be amazed what you see at night around Oregon, flying around at 3 a.m. with
Yeah.
thermal.
We're following on it, and we wish we had some magic. We'll have some conversation about, we'll look at any tool that will help.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. That ends the public participation portion. I will seek a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Seaman.
real quick, I'd like to say something. I really appreciate, Mrs. Ackerman's comments and that, we don't always agree, but we're all Oregonians and we respect each other. That was a very nice statement. Thank you, Mrs. Ackerman. I'll make a motion if nobody else has anything else. to
Thank you, Mr.
say.
Seaman.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rees. Council, any objections? Hear no objections. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.